At first, it looks like nothing. Just a small, transparent body drifting in seawater, a bell no bigger than a fingernail, delicate tentacles trailing behind it like loose threads. You could watch it for a moment and assume it is fragile, temporary, one of the countless soft creatures the ocean produces and then forgets. But this one does something that should not exist in biology. When it gets old, it does not continue forward. It does not decay. It does not accept the arrow of time the way every other animal does. Instead, under stress, under injury, under starvation, it reverses. Its adult body collapses inward, and it becomes young again, not metaphorically, not symbolically, literally. A creature that turns aging into childhood, a creature that takes the final stage of life and rewinds it. This is not myth, this is not folklore. It is documented biology. A real species discovered and studied with a life cycle that breaks one of the deepest assumptions we carry about living things. Because for us, time is one-directional. Cells accumulate damage, tissues weaken, the body moves toward collapse. We can heal, but we cannot undo the fact that we have already become what we are. But somewhere in the ocean there is an animal that does not only repair itself, it resets itself. And that forces an uncomfortable question. If nature can build a body that escapes aging, why does almost everything else still die? To understand why this is so unsettling, we have to start with the rule. The normal rule. The rule that jellyfish, like most animals, are supposed to follow. A jellyfish begins as something almost invisible. A drifting larva, a speck of life suspended in the current. It settles and it becomes a polyp, a small anchored form attached to rock or coral, quietly feeding. And then under the right conditions, the polyp releases a medusa. The adult jellyfish, the floating bell, the moving body, this is the stage we recognize. The stage that swims, the stage that reproduces, the stage that seems like the end of the line. In most jellyfish, that is exactly what it is. The medusa is adulthood, and adulthood is final. But in one species, adulthood is not a destination. It is reversible. Its name is Turritopsis dohrnii, sometimes called the immortal jellyfish. Not because it cannot be killed, not because it lives forever untouched, but because it does something no animal with a complex body should be able to do. When its environment becomes hostile, when its body is damaged, when conditions collapse, it does not simply die, it does not simply heal. It folds back into an earlier version of itself. Its bell shrinks, its tentacles retract, its tissues reorganize, and the adult medusa transforms into a juvenile polyp again. It does not move forward through life, it loops, it restarts, it escapes the one-way structure of aging. And the more you look at that, the less it feels like a miracle, and the more it feels like an error in the system. Because immortality here is not triumph. It is something stranger. A collapse. A retreat. A biological emergency exit. The animal does not become stronger with age. It abandons age entirely. Which raises the next question. How does an adult body do that? How does a creature made of specialized tissues undo specialization? Because in most animals, once a cell becomes something, it cannot choose to become something else. A skin cell does not become muscle. A nerve cell does not become heart. Life depends on commitment, and commitment is supposed to be irreversible. But this jellyfish breaks commitment, and what it does at the cellular level is one of the most extreme anomalies ever observed in nature. In most animals, adulthood is a locked door. Once you reach the final form, you do not go back. A butterfly does not return to a caterpillar. A mammal does not revert into infancy. Development moves forward because it has to. Cells specialize, tissues commit. The body becomes a single organized structure that cannot simply unbuild itself. But Turritopsis dohrnii does something that feels like the opposite of development. It treats adulthood as temporary, and it only reveals this ability when the world becomes unbearable. The immortal jellyfish does not rewind time for no reason. It does it under pressure, when the medusa is injured, when food disappears, when the water becomes hostile, when the body reaches a crisis point where survival forward is no longer possible. That is when the reversal begins. At first, the adult jellyfish stops behaving like an adult. Its bell shrinks, its swimming slows. The tentacles retract as if the animal is pulling itself inward. Then something even stranger happens. The body collapses, not as decay, not as death, but as transformation. The medusa sinks, its tissues compress. The recognizable jellyfish shape dissolves into a small, shapeless mass, a cyst-like form, a quiet, motionless knot of living material. If you saw it without context, you would assume the animal is finished. But it is not finished. It is reorganizing. Inside that collapsed structure, cells begin to do something almost impossible. They stop being what they were. Muscle cells lose their identity. Nerve cells abandon their specialization. The adult body is not repaired. It is dismantled. And from that dismantling, a new form emerges. The cyst attaches to a surface. It spreads. It becomes a polyp. The juvenile stage. The anchored beginning. And from that polyp, new jellyfish buds form again. A new medusa. A new adult. Not a continuation, but a restart. The animal has not extended adulthood. It has escaped it. This is why the term immortal is so misleading, because immortality here is not endless life. It is endless resetting. A loop. A refusal to remain in the final stage long enough to truly age. And that is what makes it so disturbing, because aging, in most biology, is not optional. It is built into the structure of specialization. The more complex an organism becomes, the harder it is to rewind. A human cannot collapse into an earlier developmental stage. A whale cannot dissolve into infancy. Complex organs cannot be unmade without destruction. And yet this jellyfish does it. Not with magic, with cells, with biology, with a mechanism that scientists still struggle to fully replicate. And this is where the story becomes much stranger than a curiosity about jellyfish. Because what Turritopsis is doing is not simply regeneration. Regeneration is repair. A lizard regrowing a tail, a starfish rebuilding an arm, that is impressive. But it is still forward motion. This is different. This is developmental reversal. The adult form does not heal into adulthood. It abandons adulthood entirely, which forces a deeper question. What does it mean to be an individual if your body can erase its own stage of life? Is the medusa that collapses into a cyst the same animal as the polyp that emerges? Or is it a kind of biological reboot, a new organism wearing the continuity of the old one? The ocean is full of strange survival strategies, camouflage, venom, bioluminescence, but this is not a weapon. This is not an adaptation for hunting. This is an adaptation against time itself, and it leads directly into the most extreme anomaly of all. Because the only way this reversal is possible is if cells can do something that cells are not supposed to do. They can switch roles, they can abandon their careers mid-life, they can rewrite identity without returning to the beginning. And that process has a name. It is the true 230 decibel moment of this animal, transdifferentiation. And once you understand what that means, the immortal jellyfish stops feeling like a curiosity and starts feeling like a crack in the rules of multicellular life. To understand why this jellyfish is not just unusual, you have to zoom in past the animal, past the bell, past the tentacles, past the life cycle, and into the level where biology becomes irreversible. Cells. Because in most multicellular life, the greatest constraint is not death, it is specialization. A cell is born with options, but as development progresses, those options disappear. A nerve cell becomes a nerve cell. A muscle cell becomes a muscle cell. A skin cell becomes skin. And once that identity is locked, it does not change. That is the entire reason complex animals can exist. Because trillions of cells agree on their role, they commit, they stay in place, they do not improvise. And this commitment is what makes aging permanent. Because specialized cells accumulate damage, they lose efficiency, and they cannot simply reset without collapsing the structure of the organism. This is why immortality is so rare, not because life cannot repair, but because life cannot rewind specialization. Except here in Turritopsis dohrnii, cells do something that should not happen in an adult body. They change careers. This is the process known as transdifferentiation. It sounds technical, but the idea is almost unsettlingly simple. A mature cell becomes another mature cell, without going back to the embryonic beginning. A muscle cell becomes a nerve cell, a digestive cell becomes skin, a structural cell becomes something entirely different, not through reproduction, not through mutation, but through identity reversal. The jellyfish does not rebuild itself from scratch, it rewrites itself from within, and that is the anomaly. Because this is the kind of cellular reprogramming that human scientists spend decades trying to force in laboratories. In our world, reversing cell identity is extremely difficult. It requires artificial signals, genetic manipulation, stem cell pathways, and controlled environments. Even then, the process is unstable and dangerous, because when cells lose identity, they can become uncontrolled. They can divide endlessly, they can become cancer. That is the trade-off. Complex animals do not rewind because rewinding is risky, but this jellyfish does it naturally, quietly, repeatedly, as if the rules are lighter for something this small. And what makes it even stranger is that the reversal is not random, it is organized, coherent. The medusa collapses into a cyst, and inside that cyst the body is not dying, it is reallocating. Cells are reassigned, structures are dismantled and rebuilt. The adult form is not repaired, it is converted, which raises an uncomfortable realization. The immortal jellyfish is not escaping death by being stronger. It is escaping death by refusing to stay the same thing. It survives by becoming something else. And that leads directly into the question scientists cannot avoid. How far does this go? Does the jellyfish maintain its genetic integrity through these resets? Does it prevent aging damage from accumulating? Does it repair DNA? Does it preserve telomeres? We know that in many organisms, aging is linked to gradual loss of cellular stability. Telomeres shorten, errors accumulate, systems degrade. But in Turritopsis, the cycle interrupts that decline. It does not guarantee eternal survival, but it breaks the normal arrow. And that arrow matters, because for most animals, time is like one-directional. Cells specialize, damage accumulates, death becomes inevitable. But here, time becomes conditional. Stress triggers reversal. Adulthood becomes optional. And biology reveals something we rarely confront. Aging is not a universal law, it is an evolutionary outcome, a constraint, a cost of complexity. The jellyfish has found a loophole, not by defeating death, but by stepping sideways out of the stage where death is supposed to arrive. But even this loophole is not limitless. Immortality is not invincibility. The ocean does not protect small miracles. Predators do not care about transdifferentiation. Disease does not pause for biological paradoxes. A jellyfish washed ashore cannot reset itself into the sea again. And this is where the story becomes even sharper. Because if nature can do this, why doesn't everything do this? Why isn't the planet full of animals that simply rewind forever? The answer is not philosophical, it is structural. The immortal jellyfish can rewrite itself because it is simple enough to survive the rewrite. But the moment complexity increases, rewinding becomes catastrophe. And that is the real boundary. Immortality is possible, but only under constraints so narrow that most life cannot afford it, which means this animal is not a promise. It is a warning. A glimpse of what biology can do when the organism is small enough and strange enough to bend rules we thought were permanent. And that brings us to the final question. If an animal can restart itself, what does it even mean to be old? And what does it mean to be the same individual when your body has erased its own adulthood? At this point, it is tempting to call this animal immortal, to treat it like an exception, a loophole in biology, a creature that has somehow escaped the most permanent rule we know. But the ocean does not allow myths, and nature does not allow free miracles, because the immortal jellyfish is not invulnerable. It is not untouchable, it is not beyond death. It can still be eaten. A fish does not care that the jellyfish can reverse its life cycle. A predator does not wait for a reset. Disease can still spread through its tissues. Parasites can still destroy it. Storms can still wash it into shallow water where reversal becomes meaningless. And when it dries out on a beach, there is no transformation, only failure. So immortality here does not mean eternal survival. It means something narrower, something stranger. The jellyfish is not escaping death. It is escaping aging. And those are not the same thing. Death is external. Aging is internal. Aging is the slow accumulation of irreversible decisions. Cells locked into roles. Structures too complex to rebuild. Damage that cannot be undone without collapsing the whole organism. The immortal jellyfish has found a way to undo those decisions, but only because it lives at a scale where the body is still flexible enough to rewrite. And that is the key limitation. Because the moment life becomes more complex, the cost of rewinding becomes catastrophic. Imagine trying to reset a human body. Not just one organ, not one tissue, but everything at once. The nervous system, the immune system, the brain, the architecture of memory, the relationships between trillions of specialized cells. A reset would not be healing, it would be destruction. This is why evolution did not give immortality to large animals, because immortality requires plasticity, and plasticity is dangerous. When cells can change identity too easily, they stop obeying structure. They divide when they should not. They grow without control, they become cancer. So nature makes a trade. Small organisms can afford rewinding, large organisms cannot. Complexity buys stability, but it also locks the arrow of time in place. And this brings us to the deeper question. If the jellyfish collapses into a polyp and later becomes a medusa again, what exactly survived? Is it the same individual, or is it a new organism built from recycled matter? When you restart development, you erase adulthood. You erase history. You erase the body that existed before. So what is continuity? In humans, identity is tied to memory, to experience, to an uninterrupted self. But the jellyfish has no autobiography, no narrative, no central brain-preserving time. Its life is not a story. It is a pattern, a biological loop. And that forces an unsettling thought. Maybe aging is not just damage. Maybe aging is information. The body remembering its own past through irreversible structure. The jellyfish does not remember. It resets. It abandons the adult form as if adulthood was only one temporary arrangement. And perhaps that is why it feels so alien, because it challenges something we treat as fundamental, that life must move forward, that the time must accumulate, that the body must become older rather than different. But in this creature, time becomes negotiable, not through magic, but through biology, through cellular rewriting. Through developmental reversal, a small animal drifts through the ocean. Quietly, it demonstrates that what we call aging is not a universal sentence. It is an evolutionary constraint. And the immortal jellyfish is what happens when that constraint is bent, not broken. Bent. Which is why it matters. Not because it promises immortality for us. It almost certainly does not. But because it shows that the rules are not as absolute as they feel. Somewhere in the ocean, there is an animal that turns adulthood into childhood. Not as a metaphor, as a mechanism. And if nature can do that even once, then the boundary between life and time is thinner than we like to believe. The immortal jellyfish is not a miracle. It is a reminder that biology is not a finished system. It is a field of compromises. And sometimes, in the smallest corners of the planet, those compromises produce something that looks impossible. If you want to keep exploring the organisms that live at the edge of what nature should allow, this is exactly where the journey continues. Because the deeper we look, the clearer it becomes that normal is only the surface version of life. Aging feels like one of the few laws life can escape. Cells break down, information is lost, and time only moves one way. Turritopsis dohrnii doesn't entirely agree. When its body begins to fail, it doesn't wait for the end. It collapses back into childhood and starts again, rewriting the story we tell ourselves about what aging is. But even if you could bend time like that, there is another limit you can't negotiate with: the planet itself. Because the rules that shape life aren't just written inside bodies. They are written in temperature, in air, and gravity, in the physics of the world you happen to live in. In our next episode, we go back to a version of Earth that followed very different rules. A world hot and heavy enough to grow a snake so large it makes every modern predator look small, and then took that possibility away forever. We will ask a simple question, with a disturbing answer. Why could Titanoboa exist then, but not now? If you want to see how far evolution can push size before the planet shuts it down, subscribe and join us for that investigation.